Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. So guys, in this video we are going to see some important React.js interview questions. So basically in this video, the questions that we have taken, we are going to see in detail the logic behind them, the entire concept behind them. So let's start with the video. But before starting, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to my channel. And if you found this video helpful, please like it so that it gives me motivation to make more content out of it. So let's start with our first question. So the first question is basic only, what is React? Okay, so many times in the interviews what happens is we know the topic but we don't know how to answer it. So for that reason only I have taken up this question. Okay, so what is React? React, which is also known as React.js, is an open source front-end JavaScript library, and make sure that it is a library and not a framework. Okay, because many times we make mistake and call it as a framework, because Angular is a framework whereas React is a library. You have to keep a note of this. Okay, that is used for building composable user interfaces, especially for single page applications. It is used for handling view layer of the web and mobile apps, and based on components in a declarative approach. React was created by Jordan Walk, and he was a software engineer working for Facebook. React was first deployed on Facebook's news feed in 2011 and Instagram in 2012. Okay, so basically if you see in this one answer, we have taken like almost all the important features of React. For example, this one, composable UI. Okay, because we know important feature of React is component based architecture. Then we have used the word single page applications. So you also have to give the answer in such a way that you use important terms, so that the interviewer gets to know that yes, you know the entire concept behind this question that you are answering. Okay, so let's move on to the next question now. What are the major features of a React? Okay, so the major features of React are, first is JSX. Okay, so it uses JSX syntax, a syntax extension of JavaScript that allows developers to write HTML in their JS code. Okay, or you can even say HTML like syntax in JS code. Second is its virtual DOM feature. Okay, it uses virtual DOM instead of real DOM, considering that real DOM manipulations are expensive. Now, just in case if you are not aware of these features, like I am going to create more videos on interview questions wherein I will cover all these questions one by one, like what is virtual DOM, then what is server side rendering, and all of these. But for now, just remember that these are the main features of React. Okay, so React uses virtual DOM instead of real DOM. The third feature is it supports server-side rendering, which is used for search engine optimization or SEO. Okay. Next is it follows unidirectional or one-way data binding. So it is very important thing. Okay, because in many times it is asked that in Angular there is two-way data binding, but in React there is one-way data binding, and people gets confused and they say that in React also two-way data binding happens. But you have to be very careful that in React only unidirectional or one-way data binding happens. Last one is the reusable component thing. Like we have composable UI components to develop the view. Basically, whatever there in, like whatever in the UI that we are seeing is a component, right? This is the basic statement that we say in React. So this composable UI feature is one of the important feature of React. So these are the main features of React. Let's move on to the next question now. So what is JSX? Okay, so JSX stands for JavaScript XML, and it is an XML like syntax extension to ECMAScript. So basically, from why we are calling it as XML is because it is an XML like syntax. Okay, XML like syntax extension to ECMAScript. Basically, it just provides the syntactic sugar for React.create element. Now, when we say this line, what we mean, we are going to see that in just a minute. So basically it is just a syntactic sugar for React.create element function, giving us the expressiveness of JavaScript along with HTML like template syntax. So let's see an example. First of all, in the example below, the text inside h1 tag is returned as a JavaScript function to render the function. So basically what we are doing is we are having a h1 tag. Okay, and in that we are basically displaying some statement. Okay, so and if we have to give a class, right, in C, like in normal HTML, how we used to give a class is like this, right? For example, if we have to write a statement in normal HTML, we would have written something like this. Okay, h1 class equals to whatever your class name. For example, in this case it is greeting, and here your content, basically whatever, and then it is your closing of HTML tag. So now you can see the difference here. So h1 tag is same. The only difference is instead of class, we are using class name. Okay. And that too with the camel case naming convention. This is very important. And after that, as usual, our class name, and then whatever we have to write, we can write in this way. It is not compulsory that you have to use curly braces and quotes. Basically, the other way of writing the same statement in React is like this. So you can write it like class name. Okay, and your whatever class name that you have to give. In this case, let's consider as greeting, and then h1 is done here. And now, for example, if you have to write a statement, you can even directly write it like this. Okay, so if you want to, like, if you want some static text to be displayed on the screen, you can put it like this. Okay, it's not compulsory that you always have to use this curly braces and then like double quotes inside it. So you can even write it like this. So now this part, what we are doing is called as JSX. Okay, because here what we are doing is we are writing a HTML like syntax in our JavaScript files or our JSX files, right? So this is the main concept of JSX. Now let's understand more about JSX. Okay, so if you don't use the JSX syntax, then the respective JavaScript code should be written as below. Okay, basically whatever the code that you are writing over here, this line, whatever I have written, how it is understood by the browser and the compiler. Okay, now we are going to see that. So basically, let me write that statement again here because that is important actually. So because through that only we will understand how JavaScript or our compiler is understanding or compiling our statement. So this was our h1, and then we had our content over here. So basically what happens is it uses react.create element behind the scenes. Okay, when you write this statement, how it is being understood is, so it takes it like this: react.create element. Okay, this is a function. It's a built-in function. Okay, so react.create element, its first argument is what? The tag. Okay, so for example, here we are using h1 tag, so its first argument will be this one. Second will be any class name or id, basically all the attributes that you are using, okay, in your element. So in this case we are using what? Class name. So its second argument will be this. Okay, and it will be taken it like this. And the third thing will be your content. Whatever the content that you have written in that element will be the third thing. Okay, third attribute. So in this way. So after this is done, your this react.create element will close. So basically in this way, your this one single line of JSX is compiled or interpreted by your compiler. Okay, so because if you know, like, if you don't use JSX, you can even write the same sentence in this way, okay, using react.create element. So basically this is only because this is very important. You have to understand how whatever the code that you are writing through JSX, how it is getting understood by your compiler and how it is getting displayed on the screen. Okay, so basically it gets converted to this thing. Okay, react.create element. Okay, so we have understood both the examples. So in the below image, you can see that this is the simple line how we write in JSX, and then how it is understood by the compiler. So the respective JavaScript code for the JSX. So let's move forward and let's move on to our next question now. What is the difference between element and component? Okay, so an element is a plain object describing what you want to appear on the screen in terms of DOM nodes or other components. Elements can contain elements in their props. Creating React element is cheap. Once an element is created, it cannot be mutated. So basically, let's understand this question in a better way. So in this question, we are asked two things first of all. First is element, and then the second thing is component. Okay. So element is basically nothing like whatever the elements that how we have in HTML, right? So for example, this one. So this is example of a element. So we have a div tag and div open close, and then we are having an ID inside it, and then our content. Okay, the JavaScript representation without JSX of React element would be as follows. Like we have already seen in the last question how this single JSX line will be interpreted. So using React dot create element. Okay, now when this line is converted into this code, Now, how it is understood by the browser? Okay, so browser understand it as an object. Okay, this same line react.create element function, what it is giving, so browser understands through this way. Okay, so let's see. In the browser, it will create an object which will have a type. Okay, and the type will be what? Your tag or your element. Okay, next is your props, whatever the props that you have, props as in your attributes to it. For example, in this case we have id, right? So props it will take, so basically children, so props will have two things, children and whatever your attribute, which is, so in this case id, we have id, so login btn, and your children will be your content basically. So login is your content, so login. Okay, and this is how your browser understands. So basically your react.create element function returns an object in this way. Okay, so basically element is nothing but element is a plain object at the end of the day, describing what you want to appear on the screen. On the screen means in your browser in terms of DOM nodes or other components. So this is how element gets displayed in terms of in terms of objects on the on your screen. So now let's move on and let's see what are components. Okay, so till now we have discussed about elements, right? So now let's see what are components. So whereas a component can be declared in several different ways, it can be a class component which has a render method, or it can be defined as a function component. In either case, it takes props as an input and returns a JSX tree as an output. So let's see the example of both the components. So first is our functional component. In functional components, basically functional component is nothing but a JavaScript function, right? So for example, if we have to create a functional component for a button, so how can we do it? Let's see. I'm going to write it over here so that you are going to understand in a better way. So let's see, for example, we have to create a component for a button. So what I'm going to write, const button equals to, then this is a JavaScript function. So ES6 way of writing the function, I'm writing it through arrow function. Then our div, if we want to pass any ID or class name, whatever, we can do it here. And then our content basically, and then it closes. Okay, the element closes. Now after that, this function also closes. So basically this is our button component. We can say that this is our button component. We have written this in a functional way or functional component way of writing components, because here what we are doing, we are writing through we are writing a component as a JavaScript function. Now one important thing is, when we write a component, we can pass, like in the similar way we have functions, right? So in functions what we can do is we can pass parameters, and like we can pass arguments and then we can get it as a parameters, right? In the same way to components we can pass what? Props. So props are what? Props are like inputs which are passed to a component. So here we can pass our props, whatever. Okay, now the JSX gets transcribed to a react.cup create element function tree. So this we have already seen how like it gets transpiled, basically whatever the code that we have written. So basically let's see. So in this case, we our element is div. So the first thing will be div. Second will be our whatever the classes or IDs that we have, basically the attributes to the element. So ID and on click, this on click is an event handler basically in this case. So all this will be the second argument, and third will be our content. So the content is login in this case. So this was like how can we create a component in functional components. Okay, now let's see the next question. Now you might have doubt why we have not seen the class-based component, because we have not seen it because in this next question we are only going to talk about components in detail. So let's see what is this question about. How to create components in React. Okay, so JSX components are building blocks of creating user interfaces in React. There are two possible ways to create a component. First possible way is through functional component, and second is through class component. So we have just now seen what is the functional component. This is the simplest way to create a component. Those are pure JavaScript functions that accept props as an object and as the one and only one parameter, and return React elements to render the output. Okay, so when we say return React element, means whatever we write inside JSX, it is returned as a JSX element that is rendered on our screen, right? That is why we say that it functional component accepts the props. When I say accept props, it means this. Okay, and when I say it returns JSX, which means that it returns this code to the DOM. So next let us see what is class components. So you can also use ES6 classes to define a component. The above function component can be written as a class-based component in this way. So basically this is our, we have written a component greeting using functional component here. Let's see the equivalent class-based component for it. For example, if you have to write a class-based component, so first thing is you have to write class, then your class name, then you have to extend it from react.component. Okay, so the first line would be always same, like class your class name. So in this case our class name is greeting, so class greeting extends react.component. Okay, next is you always have to write a render method in your when you write a class-based component, because by default it won't consider it, it won't render or return. So if you have to return something, you have to put it inside your render function or render method. Next is the similar way how you write in functional components, the basic JSX you can write. So in this case, like return h1 and then your content. Now important thing here is in class based, in functional based components, you can directly write the prop name as it is. Like the prop name that we had was message, so we have written a message, right? But in this case we have to use this dot props. So if we have to write the props prop in this case, so we have to write it like this dot props dot message. The only difference is this one. Okay, now this is like basically we have written the same component in different ways, in functional component way and a class component way. Let's move on to the next question. Now, when to use a class component over a function component? Now, you must also have always gotten this doubt, right? When exactly do we have to use? There is a lot of confusion because ideally functional components are very easy to write, easy to understand, but we always hear that we always have to learn both, like class-based components also and functional-based component also. So, what's the need of class component when we have functional component in place? So, let's see the answer for that. Okay, so after the addition of hooks is a concept in functional components that is in version React version 16.8 onwards. It is always recommended to use functional components over class components. Okay, this is very important. Like React itself suggests that if you are creating a new project or if you are writing a new code, try to create a functional component, because now functional components has all the features that you need. Okay, there is basically very less or very like nothing which you will get extra in class-based component and that you will not have in functional component. So like after React 16.8 version, everything is made available in functional component itself. Okay, because you could use state, okay, lifecycle method, and other features that were only available in class-based components present in functional component 2. Basically, what we are saying is before React version 16.8, these concepts like state, lifecycle methods were not available previously in functional component. So at that time, before 16.8 version, if we have to make use of these concepts like state and lifecycle methods, so we don't have any option because we can't use these concepts or features in our functional components. So in that case, we have to go back to the class-based components and we have to write class-based components for those things. But now, since after React 8, 16.8 version, they have made it available, all those features like for state, we have a use state hook. For lifecycle method, we have different hooks like use effect and other hooks which are providing the same functionality as that of lifecycle method. So there is basically nothing extra which class-based components are providing us. So now, but still there are situations where you have to go write class-based components. We are going to see that now. So, but there are two reasons. Okay, first of all, to use a class components over functional component. Let's see those two reasons. So the first reason is if you need a React functionality whose functional component equivalent is not present yet, like error boundaries. So error boundaries is one such concept for which the functional component equivalent is not yet present now. But let me tell you, we have libraries through which we can use error boundaries in our functional component too. So basically for that also we can use functional component. It's not like compulsorily we have to go to class-based components for using error boundaries. Next is in older versions, if the component needs state or lifecycle method, then you need to use class-based components. So we have already discussed this, that if your React code is older, which is like previous version or a lower version than 16.8, and in that case you have to use class-based components. So it happens generally in the industry or in your company. You might have seen that your code base is using a lower or a older version of React, right? So in that case you don't have any option, so and you can't even update it because of some restrictions or some reasons. Okay, so now you don't have any option because your React version is not the latest one. You don't have any option. You have to make use of classes, and you have to, if you have to use some logics of state and lifecycle methods, then you have to write class, that you have to write those in the class-based components. So these are the basic two reasons. First one is, or like for example in future, React releases a functionality which is only available in class-based component and not in functional component, then the same thing you have to use class-based component. But let me tell you, this is not going to happen because now React's main focus is like whatever the new feature they are providing, their main focus is first of all they will make it available in the functional components. Okay, so this is the basically main two reasons why you should use functional component over class-based component, and in which situation if needed you can use class-based component. So let's summarize this question because we have discussed a lot of thing in this question, and so let's summarize it. So first is when you should use functional component. So if you are creating a new React project and you don't have any dependency with anything, please go ahead and freely make use of functional component. Okay. Next is for simplicity, readability, and modern code practices, especially with the use of React hooks for state and side effects. So as I mentioned, because the major features in a React app are what? State management, and then lifecycle methods, functionality which is already being provided by React hooks. So please make use of functional component for all those cases. Now when you should use class-based component, so if you need to use lifecycle method, okay, lifecycle method as in the particular lifecycle method itself, you don't have an option to use hooks, so in that case you can go with class-based components. Second one, in scenarios where backward compatibility or integration with older code is necessary. So this is the same thing which I told you, like in your industry or in your company you don't have the option to upgrade to the latest version, so and there is also no backward compatibility, so you have to write the code whatever is there in the present, okay, like in your code base, so you have to go on and keep on writing in the same way. So in that case you have to write class-based component. So now we have the understanding when to use class-based component and when to use functional component. So always our first preference should be functional component. So if there are specific exceptional cases where we have to use class-based component, then only we should go towards class-based components. Because let me tell you, class-based components were a real pain because there was a lot of things that you have to take care when you write class-based components. And the main part is the syntax was also not that clear to understand. So that is why always it is suggestible to use functional component. Let's move on to our next question now. Again, a very important question and a very like not so easy to understand question because many people gets confused in pure components. Okay, let's see what is pure components first. So let's see one by one, line by line. So first of all, what are pure components? Pure components are the components which render the same output for the same state and props. Okay. Now this statement itself is not that easy to understand. Okay, let me tell you because why? Because what people do is they just what I would say mug up this line and they will just say the same in front of interviewer, but they don't know what this one single line consists, the logic behind this one single line. Okay, let's understand it easily. First of all, before answering this question, you should have the understanding that whenever your state or props changes, your React component re-renders every time, right? You should know that. So now what happens is whenever there is a change in your state or props in your React component, there is your React component re-renders every time whenever there is a change. So let's talk about class-based component first, and then we will go to functional components. Okay. So in class-based components, what happens? Suppose let me say, let's take an example. Okay. So you have a count, okay, count state which has its value initially as 0. Now, in your code you have written some logic where count is getting increased every time, but in a different ways. Okay, so for example, initially your count value is 0, that it got incremented to 1, and then again the count values changed, but it got changed to 1 only. Okay, are you getting my point? So basically what's happening is initially your count value was 1, then it got incremented to 1, then it a piece of code get executed, but that code changed the value of count, but the new changed value is also 1, right? So as per the logic which I've told, the whenever there is a change in state, the component re-renders every time, right? So whenever value was 0 and it got changed to 1, our component will re-render. This makes sense. Why? Because whenever there is a new value, the component should re-render, so that whatever the change in value should be reflected on our DOM on our or on our screen. But this time, whenever value is same, there might be cases, okay, when you don't want your component to re-render, because in your code when you write, the states gets changed very frequently at many different places, and there are many cases when your values change, but it does not actually change. It just overrides the same value. Okay, so in this case, I told you, right, a piece of code might have got executed, but that piece of code changed your value to the same value which it was previously. So what in this case you can do is you can use React dot pure component in your class based component. Okay, so what we have seen one example right above while we were writing the class based component. So for example, here we are writing class greeting extends React dot component. So instead of writing React dot component, you can write React dot pure component in this way, right? So what it will do is it will make your code as a pure React component. So when you write this React.pure component instead of React component, it makes your component as a pure component. And when props or state changes, props pure component will do a shallow comparison. This word is very important, shallow comparison. What is a shallow comparison basically? So what happens is basically in behind the scenes is whatever your uh, code is, for that a virtual DOM tree is created. For example, we have basically this only we can consider it as, okay, so our new value, this is our new value and this was our old value. So a shallow comparison between these two will be done, and React will see that, okay, the value has not actually changed. So there is no need for re-rendering the entire component, right? So because this is like an extra expensive operation that I don't want to do. So in this case, what it will do is it will do a shallow comparison on both props and state by invoking should component update. Now this is happening behind the scenes. We don't have to consider about it. We just have to keep in mind that if I have to make my component a pure component in class based component, then I just have to extend react.pure component in my code. That's it. And React will automatically take care of the other things. So what it will do behind the scene is it will just every time whenever there is a state change or a prop change, it will do a shallow comparison between the previous value and the current value, and then it will see whether whether the new value that has updated is actually a different value, or is it the same value as the previous one. And if it is the same as the previous one, then it will not re-render your component, and thus it will make your app very performant. And it will be like it will not have extra operations. Basically, for every state change, a re-render will not happen. So I hope now you have got how can we avoid extra re-rendering in class-based component using pure component, right? Now this was a different concept in class-based component. Now we have a whole different idea of pure component in functional component. Like it's similar only, but there are many things that you have to remember. So let's discuss about functional component now. Okay, so class-based component was very simple, right? Let's revise it quickly. So what happens is if we extend a pure component in class component instead of a React.component, then what happens is it considered your component as a pure React component, and whenever there is a change in state or props, your React code will do a shallow comparison between the previous value and the new value. And if it finds out that both the values are same, then it will not re-render your component. Hence, it will increase the performance of your React component. Okay. Next, let's now move on to the functional component. How this happens in the functional components. Okay. So let's read the statement first. In functional component, you can achieve these pure components through memoized React.memo. Okay, React.memo function API wrapping around the component. This API prevents unnecessary re-renders by comparing the previous props and new props using shallow comparison. So it will be helpful for performance optimizations. So now till now what we have studied, so you might have got the idea that it is doing the basically same thing, right? There is nothing much but that it is doing, right? But let's look further. But at the same time, it won't compare the previous state with the current state. Okay, this is very important. But at the same time, it won't compare the previous state with the current state, because functional components in itself prevents unnecessary re-rendering by default when you set the same state again. Okay, so basically, functional components are like written later. Okay, previous ones were the class-based component. So in functional components, what happens is by default only this functionality is given to functional components, that if there is the if your state value is similar, okay, that similar as the previous state value, then functional component by default will not re-render. So functional component has this thing that if my count state is 0, okay, and then it initially it got incremented to 1, then it got incremented to 2, and then it got incremented again 3, then in the next code execution the same value got updated. Okay, like the previous value was 3 and the new value was also 3. So when this case happens, the functional components are smart enough that they will not re-render your component, they will keep your component as it is. Okay, so considering that state re-rendering, you don't have to say about pure component in that case, because functional component already by default are taking care of state re-rendering. Okay, so when you talk about functional component, you only have to discuss about majorly about the your props. Okay, because we have already seen that re-renders happens in two cases, whenever your state changes and whenever your props changes. So we have already seen that state re-rendering functional component is automatically handling by default. Whenever there is the same value on your on your state, functional component will not change it, right? So now let's talk about state. Let's talk about props, how functional component is taking care of your props. Let's talk about how props changes are handled using react.memo. Okay, so we have this one pure component code example. This is a functional component. So let's see what this code is doing. Basically, this code has two components. Okay, this one from here to here is one component, and this one from here to here is another component. Okay, so the above one you can say is a child component. Okay, and the below one is a parent component. Okay, so let's start reading the code from this line, because this is a parent component. So what is happening here is we are writing a component which is a functional component, and the name of the component is employee registration form. So we have created an employee registration form, and here we have created two states, name and email. Okay, using our use state hook. So now the first thing that we are doing is we are displaying this name on the screen, and we are gathering an input from the user using the value and on change event handler. Okay, and then the similar way we are getting email from user using the same concept of like hooks. Okay, now after that what we are doing is we are calling our employee profile component inside this parent component. Okay, now let's go to our child component, which is the employee profile. So if you see, we are wrapping our child component, which is the employee profile, inside a memo. Okay, memo function. Right now, also one thing to note is when we are calling our employee profile, we are only passing one prop, that is name, and we are not passing the other prop, which is email. Right, so this is important because when you see your child component employee profile, we are using both name and email. So like this is totally fine. Okay, this is not an error situation, because if you don't pass a prop, then and if you are calling it or using it in your child component, then it will by default have an undefined value. Okay, so when you are getting email here, it will have an undefined value, but that is not the concept of this question. The concept is we are passing one value. Okay, so why we are doing this, and we are wrapping our child component inside a memo. So what ideally happens is whenever there is a change in your name component, okay, so this component will re-render, right? Because we know that the name value we are getting through a state. Okay, so what happens is whenever the user is typing their name inside the input field, the name will change. Okay, the state value will change. Okay, this will cause the employee registration form component to re-render, and whenever the employee registration form will re-render, its child component will also re-render automatically. Okay, so whenever the employee registration form will re-render, then this employee profile will also re-render, and you can understand, okay, that the re-rendering is happening for a reason, because the name is changing. So ideally the name should change here also, right? But we don't want that when I'm changing email, my child component should re-render. That is the only reason we have captured this child component inside a memo. So what this memo will do is it will only check for your name. Why? because we have only passed name here. So whenever there is a change in the name state value, it will see whether your previous name prop value, because we are getting this name as a prop in this child component. So it will see whether the name that we have got is similar to the previous name. Okay, if it is similar, it will not re-render this component of yours. Okay, in the similar way, whenever what happens is, when suppose on the screen we will have these two fields. Okay, so name, okay, and we will have an input for it, and then we will have an email. Okay, so we will have another input for it. Okay, so suppose when I'm writing my name here, A, B, C, when I'm typing this employee registration form will re-render every time. Okay, and when this will re-render at the same time, my employee profile will also re-render, because the name value is changing every time when I'm typing anything new. But let's see the second case, when I'm typing something in the email. Okay, A, X, Y, so this employee registration form will re-render, because email is a part of this component, employee registration form. But I don't want, because of this component re-render, my child component should re-render, right? That's why I have captured that inside my memo. Okay, this memo method. So what will happen, it will not re-render my child component, because we are using the memo value there, and we are not passing our email value as a prop. So the email value is always undefined. Okay, what I'm saying is, for our child component, the email value is always undefined. Okay, so what this memo method is doing is, it is always checking the value of email, and for it the value is always undefined. Okay, because in the child component, when we are sending the email value, it is always getting as undefined. The value we are changing, although, but that value changed is only for our parent component, and that change is not getting passed to our child component. So what memo is doing over here is, memo is taking care of this thing, that if the value is always undefined, and if it is always same, and it is not getting updated, why should I update this child component? There is no need for that extra re-rendering. And because of this thing, the performance of our app increases a lot. Okay, because when we put our component inside a memo method, memo automatically takes care of unnecessary rendering. Okay, unnecessary re-rendering. So in this case, I hope you might have got the explanation. Let's all for this pure component. Let's move on now to the next one. And if you have any doubt, you can ask in the comment section, and I can give you a better example, or I can make you explain in a different way also, because I can understand these concepts are very confusing at times. Okay, you need to understand with an example every time, then only the concepts will come to your mind. Let's move on to the next question, which is like, what is state in React? Again, a very important question. And although we know what is the state in React, it is often that in interviews, we stuck and we don't have the answer, like how to answer this question, like what is state. So let's see the answer for this question. The state of a component is an object that holds some information that may change over the lifetime of a component. The important point is, whenever the state object changes, the component re-renders. It is always recommended to make your state as simple as possible and minimize the number of stateful components. So this is the answer for what is a state. Okay, first of all, let's see one by one. So state of a component is an object that holds some information that may change over the lifetime of the component. Okay, and this thing we already know. Whenever the state object changes, the component re-renders, right? We have just seen now. So you can consider that state is an object that holds some information, and this diagram clearly explains that props is something which you get as an input to your component, but state is managed within your component itself. You cannot you are not getting states from somewhere outside. So state is used for internal communication inside a component, right? And if you want to pass your state to a next component, then you can pass it as a prop, right? That we have just seen in the last example. So let's see how can we use state in a functional component. Let's take an example of a user component with a message state. So we are going to create a component. First of all, let's see, this is our component, functional component. So the component name is user component, and our state we have created is as a message state. So if you are not aware, then in functional component we write state like this. So const and then your state name and then set state, and then equals to your hook, which is your use state hook, and your default value. Okay, the initial value that we want to give to the state. So in this case, I want to give the initial value to my message state as welcome to React world. So, and then when I write in the DOM h1, and then I can represent, like I can display the value as this way, okay, message value. So in this way, basically we write state in React component. Let's see how can we write the state in class component. So in class component, basically we create a class. First of all, class user extends react.component, and then we always have to create a constructor first of all, okay, because we have to define our state, okay, and states can only be defined inside your constructors. Then in constructor you have a super method that you have to call first, and then how will you define your state? So this dot state and equals to, you have to write an object and that your state, like message welcome to React world, okay, and then you will display it in this way, this dot state dot message. So this is the general convention that we follow if we have to write state in class-based component. So it's like nothing much in this case. You just have to know the syntax of writing it and you are fine with it. So the basic concept is there are one or two major points that you have to keep in mind. That first of all, whenever there is a change in state, your change in state, okay, it will cause a re-render, okay. This is the most important thing that you have to remember about state. And the second is state are managed internally within a component, okay, managed internally, okay, within a component. So this is the main important thing. So now let's again, for the last time, let's read out this statement. State of a component is an object that holds some information that may change over a lifetime of the component. The important point is whenever the state object changes, the component re-renders. It is always recommended to make our state as simple as possible and minimize the number of stateful components. Let's move on to our next question. So since we have studied what is state, now it is like we have to understand what is props, right? Because states and props are very similar and like very same, okay? So we have to understand exactly what is state and what is prop, and then we will also understand what is the difference between both. So let's understand props. Props are inputs to component. We have already seen this in the last diagram. They are single valued or objects containing a set of values that are passed to the components on creation of similar to HTML tag attributes. Here, the data is passed down from a parent component to a child component. This is very important. Okay, you have to always remember that props are always passed from a parent component to a child component. It is never the case that you will pass a prop from your child component to a parent component. That is not happening. Okay, so props are always passed from your parent component to child component, and props are inputs to the components. Now the primary usage or purpose of props are, first of all, is to pass custom data to your component. Second is to trigger state changes, and the third is use via this .props .react props inside components render method. This is basically the third point is for class based component. But the first 2 points you understood. If you want to pass any custom data to your component, then you can use props. And the second one is your props triggers re-rendering. Okay, the change in your props causes re-rendering of your component. For example, let us create an element with React prop property. So basically, if your element is like this and you have to pass a prop, you can pass it in this way. Here the prop name is React prop. You can take any name in this case, and your value. This is basically, we call it as name and value. Okay, this is the name of the prop and this is the value of the prop. You should also be familiar about the terminologies. Okay, now let's move forward and let's see an example for props usage in component. I'm very sure all of you might be already aware, but you have to keep one example in your mind for your interviews, so that when time comes, you have one example for you so that you can answer it. So again, we have two components. One is our child component and one is our parent component. So this is our child component, okay, and this is our parent component. So the name only we have given in this case as parent component and child component to our components. So in the parent component, what we are doing is we are calling our child component 2 times, okay, and we are passing some values, okay, to the props. So we are passing 3 props. First of all, name, age, and gender. So the first value we are doing is we are passing it as John. Second value we are passing it as 30, and third value we are passing it as male. Then what we are doing is we are getting this props and we are displaying all these 3 values: props.name, props.age, and props.gender. So the major and important benefit of using props is that it provides code reusability or component reusability. Because what is happening here is we are writing one child component, okay, but we are displaying this child component with two different values. Okay, if you observe that what we are doing, we are just calling this child component two times with different values. So this provides a lot of customization to our child component. We can call this as any n number of times with n different values, and this is like the major feature of React, which is code reusability. So props provide code reusability. You always have to remember this. Okay, reusability, code reusability, or you can say as composability. Okay, it makes our code composable as in you are writing components, right, which can be used multiple times with different values, so it will make your code composable. So props usage in component. So yeah, one important point to note is one way of using props value is this way. You will get your props and then props.name, props.age, props.gender. You will destructure it on the go. Next is you can destructure it initially, okay, at the starting point only. You don't have to like first of all takes props and then like the previous way, right, how we were doing props.name, props.age. What you can do is we can destructure while you are writing your component at that point only. So here in the curly brackets, you can write name, age and gender, and then you can use it at different places. The properties from props object can be accessed directly using destructuring feature from ES6, and this feature that you are seeing is the ES6 feature, not specific to React. Okay, it is also possible to fall back to default value when the prop value is not specified. The above child component can be simplified like below. So we have seen one case in the previous questions where like the value of prop was not passed. So for example, if there is no default value that is passed, for example, in this case, when I'm calling my child component second time, and in case I don't write this, okay, gender female, I didn't pass this, I only passed two props, that is name is Mary and age is 25. So I want to give a default value to my gender. Okay, like for in example in this case, if the value is not passed, so that it will automatically take this default value which is male. Okay, and how does it behind the scenes? Because I told you already, right? So if the gender value itself is not passed, first of all, then it will consider that gender is undefined. So if the gender is undefined, it will consider that, okay, if I'm getting an undefined value, then let me put a default value which is given to me. So in this case, it will update this undefined with the male, and then it will consider the default value. And the default value only acts in case when the value is not passed. If the value is passed, definitely it will take that passed value. Okay, so this was the concept behind props. Now let's move on to our next question, which is the difference between state and props. This is the last question for today. So we have seen what is state, we have seen what is props. Now it is very important to understand the difference between both. Okay, so in React, both state and props are plain JavaScript objects which are used to manage the data of a component, but they are used in different ways and have different characteristics. We have already seen the difference between them, but let's summarize it now. The state entity is managed by the component itself, okay, and can be updated using the setter set state for a class component function. Okay, so set state method we use in class component basically, and in functional component, if you have to use, we have used state method. Unlike props, state can be modified by the component and used to manage the internal state of the component. Okay, so this is not the default behavior of props. This is only specific to state. That is why we are saying, unlike props, state can be modified by the component and is used to manage the internal state of the component. So the states are only bound to their component. Okay, that is they are managed internally by a component. Moreover, changes in state triggers a re-render of the component and its children. The component cannot become reusable with the usage of state alone. Okay. So when I say this line, the component cannot become reusable with the usage of state alone. What I mean by this is, I was just explaining you, right, how props are helping us to make our code composable or reusable, right? Because props provide us this facility that you can pass different values to your props, and then your child component will become reusable. But just by using states alone, you cannot make your code reusable. Okay, that is why it says this line, that components cannot become reusable with the usage of state alone. So if you want to make your component reusable, you have to make use of props also. So, and now let's see the difference for props. So on the other hand, props, which is a short for properties, are passed to a component by its parent component and are read only. This is very important, that props are read only and the value of props cannot be changed. Okay, by the child components. If the value needs to be changed, then it can only be done by the parent component, meaning that they cannot be modified by the own component itself. Also, props can be used to configure the behavior of a component and to pass data between components. The components become reusable with the usage of props. We have already seen these 3 points. First point was props can be used to configure the behavior of a component and pass the data between the components become reusable with the use of state usage of props. So for props, there are 3 points that we should remember in mind. First is pass data. Okay, props helps in passing the data from parent component to child component. One more is like reusable, right? Reusable or composable. And first one is like it is props are read only. Okay, you cannot modify your props value in your child components. So this was the difference. So in this video, basically we have covered almost like 10 questions on and these are like if you have already appeared for some interviews, you might know that these are the core React concepts. Okay, these are the core React concepts of your React interviews. And you know, as I told in the initially only when I was starting the video, we all know the answers and we all have already used these concepts in our while we are doing code, right, when we are writing or doing our projects. But you know, it is also important that we should understand this question separately, so that you know, when time comes, when we are sitting in interviews, we are not blank or we are not short of words, right? We should have answers, or we should have the words to explain to the interviewer that you know, that our concepts are also clear. It's not like we just know these topics. It's like our concepts are also clear about these questions and we know the things what is happening behind the scenes. So that's all for this video. If you found it helpful, please share your valuable feedback in the comment section, so that you know, this will motivate me to bring in more such like these kinds of interview question videos. And if you are new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe to it so that you don't miss any important updates. So that's all for this video. Thanks for watching the video. Bye.